Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Tonight, we're bringing you again Series 2 of the Civic Exchange, the Abdul Maid podcast. Last week, I had James Taylor with me, my guest, and tonight I have Dr. Jason Outlaw, Doctor of Psychology. The murder trial of George Floyd, and where do we go from here? If Black people are on a spiritual journey to be free, we have to get our psychological mind right. So it's no other way to get that going than to have here with me a psychologist that's going to break out some point, and we're going to have a discussion going on. Dr. Jason Outlaw, welcome to the K. Abdul Mahid podcast.
Thanks for having me today.
Thank you.
I appreciate you having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yes, sir. So tell the people where you're from and what do you do?
Well, born and raised in Oakland, California, and so I'm very much interested in all things regarding Oakland and things affecting Oakland. I'm a psychologist, and so one of the reasons why I decided to become a psychologist and practice back in the Bay Area is to give back to the community. And so I always wanted to come back home. I've lived in 5 different states, and I wanted to ultimately come back and provide psychological services to people who look like you and I, who also are born and raised here or live here. And so I've been doing this work for about 12 years now in the Bay Area and certainly enjoying it. I would say this, it's difficult work. It's not easy work. Any major city in the United States that has a large concentration of people of color are going through a lot. It's not easy. It's one of those things where it tests your resilience, and a large percentage of us qualify for a psychological disorder at any given time. So I'm hoping that answers your question, but I'm certainly looking forward to talking about impacts and psychological impacts of things that are going on in the world today.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for that introduction and that segue of yourself, because, we've known each other for so long, but it's good for us to start giving back to the community in a professional setting and bring to bear and make sure our community know that we are here for them, and we're going to make sure we be the flag bearer for change to come.
There you go.
So I posed some questions to you earlier, but the audience is going to get to hear about this. So the killing of George Floyd, in particular, in the hands of law enforcement, have a psychological effect on other Black men in general.
Yeah, the answer to that is pretty obvious. So yes, definitely the killing of George Floyd, as well as all the multitude of killings by law enforcement, and just the killing of Black people in general, that definitely has an effect or an impact on us psychologically. I'd say some of the things that stand out to me, and one of the things that stands out most to me, is we have to really be careful, because I feel as if we are experiencing a desensitization regarding Black people being killed. Anytime you continuously see anyone being killed, attacked, assaulted on camera, you get used to it after a while, right? And that's not something that we want to get used to for obvious reasons. But the world, not just the United States, not just Black people, everyone in the world is getting desensitized to it. And what that means is now we are all less emotionally impacted by seeing people getting killed on camera, on tape, on video. Now, it's a double-edged sword, because Apple and iPhone and Android, they came out with the cell phone approximately, with the video and the camera and so forth on it. That hasn't been the case forever. And so you think back to other cases that have happened in the past where you had to have a camcorder ready to go, fired up, and ready to happen. That doesn't happen every day. But now, in every hand of every person over 12, 13 years old, you have a cell phone, and now we are able to capture objective information before us. And that has led to some change. It's led to some opening of our eyes, at least, to kind of see that what we've been saying about law enforcement, and don't get me wrong, I want to generalize about law enforcement across the board, but what our people have been saying about our interaction with law enforcement, where the law enforcement officer may say, well, he did this, he flinched, he reacted to me in a way that was aggressive, and we can see it and say, no, that did not happen. And so, of course, I'm just in strong belief that the advent of the cell phone with video camera has given us information and data to support what we've been saying this whole time.
Okay, so yeah, so that's a good point. So if the killing does have a psychological effect on black men, so how does it materialize? As a psychologist, how will does materialize? What are the signs?
Well, I mean, it can materialize or manifest itself in lots of different ways. There is not just
so give
one,
us some pointers.
I'm definitely give you some, but it's not just one way. I want everybody to understand it's not just as if everyone who goes through or sees the desensitization of black people being killed, we're all going to look exactly the same. But you're going to see it happen in terms of a trauma-like response, right? So anytime we have a trauma-like response, we are more likely to be on edge, right? Like hyper vigilant, hypersensitive about different things that might trigger. So if you have the police behind you and their lights are on, whether it's for you or somebody else, your heart rate's going to end up beating really fast. You might have sweaty palms. You might find yourself in a fight or flight situation, right? So that's a trauma-like response. Any sort of thing that reminds you of the George Floyd incident or any incident with people being killed is likely going to create a similar sort of response there as well. So it's one of those things where we have to understand that a trauma-like response is going to be the most common. Aside from that, you can see depression. It might not look exactly the same in all men. Men tend to exhibit depression in terms of anger. That's how we manifest our depression many times, in terms of anger. But a lot of times people internalize it as well. And just a traditional form of depressive symptoms or depressive presentation can come out as well. Anxiety, that falls within the trauma-like arena, but we can certainly experience anxiety and just this general sense of panic or worry that something bad is going to happen. And that is going to take you away from your general focus and your general ability to function on a day-to-day basis. So those are like the common ones. I'd also say relationships, right? So if you find yourself in a relationship and you've been watching these incidents take place over and over and over the years, you are likely going to not be as patient. You might be a little bit more quick to become upset, less understanding, all the things that we kind of see as negative aspects of a relationship. You can certainly experience and see that as well. So those are the common ones.
Yeah. So Ben, so if that's how it materialized, because some of the symptoms, you just like, when you running from the police, there is an interpretation that somehow you're suspicious. You somehow suspicious, and you're guilty of certain thing. You're suspicious of certain thing, and so that is a trigger for the police to come after you.
Sure.
Because once they're on the beat, they see you running,
sure.
And that's why we have got so many innocent people killed,
sure.
just sure. from running, sure. And that is because that trauma, it reminds them of that, because that's a traumatic behavior. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, Abdul, because it's not even that you have to experience the trauma yourself. If we have been assaulted by anyone, let alone the police, if we've been assaulted by anyone, we are going to be a little bit more on edge if a situation like that comes up again. But guess what? You don't even have to experience it yourself. You can vicariously witness someone experiencing a trauma or an assault, and just by seeing how outrageous it is, you can decide, oh my God, I don't want to do anything. I don't want anything to do with that. And so therefore, that same experience can manifest itself just through vicarious trauma. That makes some sense.
Okay, definitely. No, it makes definitely sense. So that's how some of the stuff materialized. And and you believe that in 2021 we are still scared. We're still dealing with those trauma. So that's why I want to bring a psychologist to this show to talk about the post-verdict and the psychological effect. So Jason, my next point of question is this. We hear this all the time. Sometimes it's a joke, but sometimes it comes out in a professional setting. Does black men have superhuman strength?
Arguably, I would say that we have superhuman strength. Let me place some content or some context around that. If you think about it, our entire history in this country has been plagued with discrimination, racism. We were enslaved. We've been mistreated. Anytime we get a chip, it's a half of a chip. They don't want to give us the chip. We got to fight for ourselves for anything and everything. But we remain resilient as a people. Collectively, we are very resilient. We find ourselves in positions and in situations of power and authority that we wouldn't even imagine. And so, arguably, yes, we do have superhuman powers to be able to have endured all of that in just a couple hundred years. Like a lot of times people will look back and say, oh, well, the slave period was so long ago. Guess what? There's people's grandparents that their grandparents were enslaved, or it's not too many generations away.
But so you just the tenacity to leave and the willpower to leave. I mean, isn't that what that comes from? You just have this.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, just experiencing hope and living off hope that things are going to get better.
Yeah.
And not to get religious here, but arguably, church kind of promotes a certain level of just having the faith that tomorrow is going to be a better day.
That's
right.
And
so that's kind of carried us along.
It's so fun. Faith wins supreme. I agree to that. So, but then, the problem with that, I mean, we just talked about that jokingly, but it comes out in a professional setting. There is a phrase that is used: excited delirium. Mm-hmm. Excited delirium. We're trying to figure out if that's a legal terminology or if that's a medical terminology, because I'm telling you, as a psychologist, have you ever heard the phrase or the word excited delirium?
I've heard of it.
And if so, in what setting, in what capacity?
Let me just start just to make sure everybody's on the same page here. So the term delirium, we've all heard the term, oh, you're delirious, right?
Okay.
So to be delirious just means that you have an altered sense of consciousness. So if you get hit on the head, you get a traumatic brain injury, or you get in a fight of some sort, you can experience delirium based on that. And that just, once again, means that you have an altered sense of consciousness. Your memory might go, and you may say, where am I right now, right? Like we've all heard and seen people say, what's going on here? That is an example of delirium, delirious. The concept excited delirium is a newer concept that people have been using. I believe it was in the 80s when it was first coined, and it's not a legal phrase. It's not a medical phrase either. In essence, what I can deduce is that it's something that has been created and used to attempt to explain something that people are seeing as unexplainable. And so certainly you would expect it to be, in the medical model, a diagnosis of some sort, but it's not. It's just a phrase that's being used to attempt to explain someone was under the influence of some drug or alcohol, and they died, and now we are trying to explain it outside of our own personal responsibility. And so if you ask me for my opinion from a medical professional, no, we can't diagnose excited delirium. We can't explain excited delirium. It's just something that's just kind of been created to attempt to, pull the wool over our eyes.
So definitely. So that's exactly what it is. So basically, it comes out of ways to chip away from liability, to create explain action. So that was what they was trying to do with the George Floyd murder trial. That's exactly what the defense was trying to do, and that was part of his explanation why he got his knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. He was, for some reason, Judge Floyd was going to be the superhuman, and he was going to wake up with the handcuff and start punching them. So that was his explanation, but I'm glad that the jury never buy that, but it's a phrase that they continue to use. So we need to put that to rest. We need to get that word out of our vocabulary because it never existed, and there's no justification for that.
Well, I even want to take it a step further. I feel as if the medical field needs to dispel this myth, right? And so if they're attempting to use a somewhat medical explanation for a death, and it's really supposed to be a syndrome, excited delirium syndrome, and all a syndrome is a cluster of symptoms, right? So any disorder is really a cluster of symptoms too. But since these non-medical professionals are attempting to use this non-medical or somewhat pseudo-medical phrase, we need to, as a medical industry or field, come out and speak against this and show that there's no validity, there's no medical history, there's been no research about this, and there is no way through CAT scan, through any sort of medical model of assessment that we can say, in fact, yes, this death or this injury was due to this excited delirium term. And so it's really, but you know how money works, and when it comes to getting people off or on a certain case, there's going to be people with money and using high-powered attorneys to explain it.
Yeah.
Kind of
so definitely. So I never liked that phrase, and that's why I want to bring you on to explain that. So, but there's historical aspect to that, and that brings me to the third line of question: phrase super predators. Super predators is a word that's been used by politicians. Actually, we're referring to black boys during the crime bill that was going on, 1996 crime bill that was happening, 1986. So that crime bill that was describing young black boys that wilding out, like I would call now wilding out. So they call them super predators. That the wilding out, they need to be locked up. So underprivileged young black boys, are they super predators?
Definitely not. When I hear you talk about and use the term super predators in the context of the crime bill, it sounds as if that was attempting to be used to justify it, right? And so if you convince the people that there's something to be afraid of out there, right, you do a better job at getting people to buy into this so-called solution. So to use a phrase, super predators, I mean, there's going to be a lot of people out there who hear that and they're going to say, oh my God, what do we have before us? This is going to affect my family and my children and my friends and everyone else. What are we going to do about this? But we all know how politics works in a sense, right? And if you really want to get people emotionally involved with anything, you create fear with them. Fear is the easiest way of creating people being attached to a TV screen in a sense to try to gain some form of a solution long term. But to answer your question, no, there's no such thing as a super predator. I've not heard that phrase or that term used outside of this context. And so once again, it sounds like a political strategy.
Yeah, that's what it is exactly. I wanted to make sure I get your point of it because it was a political strategy that was used to justify longer sentences and just sentencing young African-American boys for long prison terms. And so a lot of the people that actually coined that phrase, that used that phrase, some of them have apologized publicly and some of them have atoned. So, and Hillary Clinton was one of those people that used that phrase. So we got to be specific. Hillary Clinton used that word, super predator, and also our president Joe Biden also used that word. So, but go ahead.
But from a politics standpoint, right? Like you have to think about. I'm not a politician, but I do understand how it works. You have a package that you want the people to buy into, or the people, the voters and so forth to buy into. From a political standpoint, you're willing to do damn near anything to get that thing to pass. And that's part of the problem with politicians is like they're willing to do anything and everything to get this thing in the pass stage. And so if I could have been 15 years old and I was a part of that discussion and someone were to use the term or the phrase super predator, I'm going to ask, well, what's the validity of that phrase? Like, where is that in the medical diagnostic manual? Is that, well, where is it? You sound like you guys are making up a phrase to underscore the importance of your package. You can't do that because, well, you can if you want something to pass, right? Politics, that's what it's
like. So basically that's what it is. So I'm glad that you're breaking it from a medical and professional psychological point of view. So if we're not superhuman, if we're not super predators, then it comes to that. So what is the justification for the police to every time they come in contact with a black man to be ready to shoot or to be ready to make a justification to shoot or an explanation to shoot? What is that?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. There's many explanations for it. It's not just one explanation, but let's take some of the common ones. So common issue number one is you have to realize, let's take Oakland, for example, Oakland or San Francisco or any major city. You have OPD officers who generally tend to be 23, 24 years old. They tend to be from the suburbs, right, where they have little experience with people of color. They have only seen us on TV, right? And they've experienced us to a small little extent. So guess what? Their entire worldview about people of color tends to be based off of entertainment and TV. And so if they've watched movies that entertain violence to a certain extent, and they read about the statistics, the violence and crime statistics in Oakland, for example, and now they got this $85,000 job, 24 years old, and they are thrown in the middle of Oakland where, let's be honest, a large number of young men carry guns for their protection, right? If somebody's trying to kill you, it's not an irrational thought that you may have to carry your gun so that you don't get killed.
Well, that's your constitutional right if you have a license and stuff. Yeah, but yeah, correct. To that point.
So you put them in a city and you put them on a beat, and guess what? They're afraid. That's definitely a part of it. They're afraid that the moment they hit that street, someone's going to end up shooting them. And we have to also think back to 321. I believe that was in 2009. I believe it was 4 or 5, maybe 5 OPD officers were killed by one person. Yeah. They remember that, right? Anytime something like that happens, they're of course going to remember that. And it's probably in the training manuals to this day, so that this is what we're not going to do. And you also have to think about the fact that police officers are told you need to go home to your families. And while I agree that they should go home to their families, everybody should go home to their families. This us versus them mentality of we're better than the civilians, that needs to go, but it certainly is still here. And so it's just kind of one of several sort of issues. Let me give you just one more reason of why when law enforcement officers tend to kind of rim themselves up a little bit. Another reason that happens in high frequency, somewhat has to do with white supremacy. Let's just be honest about it. Many people who are watching this may disagree with me, but if you really want to maintain your stronghold on the world, on the United States, on California, on Oakland, one way of doing it is maintaining law and order. And so the police historically were set up to slave patrols to find runaway slaves clearly at that period of time. And so it's not a far-fetched sort of idea that the policies and procedures have been passed down from generation to generation, of police department to police department. And it's not even that long ago in our lifetime or in our parents' lifetime that the first Black OPD officer was employed in the city of Oakland. So that just lets you know how much of we are going to keep this for us. And in addition to we're going to keep it for us, we're going to make sure that we remain in power. That might not be said overtly, but it certainly is suggested. And I would think that many people would agree with me on it, that, we have to kind of maintain our place in this society.
Yeah. Well, definitely, and on the flip side to that, Oakland have been making a progress. We just had the second or the third police chief in history, and we need to have more local eyes. We need to have more cops.
Second or third black
chief, in Oakland, I believe so. So that's the kind of stuff that we need, that desensitize and demystify. Going into the community, like you say, you have a 24-year-old young, oftentimes ill-trained, oftentimes inexperienced, and you put them out there to deal with generational problem in the community. Sure. It's like a time bomb waiting to happen.
Sure. And another reason, and this is another common one as well, is the male ego is powerful, right? So you get a bunch of 24, 25-year-olds together. They have the power and the license to kill. It's not a far-fetched idea that they would have a little fun. And that's just kind of part of the reality of this whole thing. And so what I mean by that, have a little fun, is to take out some of their anger and some of their feelings and political sort of ideologies onto what they term to be people who don't deserve respect. So Abdul, there's many reasons of why that happens, and I could come up with 10 or 15 right here today and talk about them, and everybody who's watching this would at least connect with one or two of those reasons. So there's a multitude of them, and we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Now there is this concept right now of reform, police reform, and we don't know how far it's going to go. We don't know what it's going to look like, but at least people are talking about it in a sense like, all right, this is not just some super intangible sideways sort of idea. The concept has been on the table, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, well, just because you referred to the Judge Floyd Justice in Policing Act, so that bill is right now, it's in the Senate because the House of Congress already passed it. So I think it definitely it puts some accountability. What it does, it actually hold people accountable.
Sure.
Because we all accountable. If you are officer of the law, you have to operate under the law. You cannot be a renegade. You cannot be rogue. You cannot be a renegade. You cannot do stuff that you want to do.
Well, let me even respond to that. Currently, you can.
In a way, yes, sir. All you got to do is I'm fear for my life, and that's what it is.
Fear for my life.
That's what
excited delirium. Yeah. He had a gun, but it was a cell phone. There's all sorts of
that's
reasons.
what it is. And we're dealing with a lot of those situations right now, and we need to put a stop to that. And Oakland is at the forefront of this fight, and we can't let go. We have to keep the force. We have to let them know that this is affecting a lot of black men.
Yeah.
Even the ones that are not living that life is affecting us. And when we speak, people got to listen to us, because a lot of times we give way to other people speaking for us. We move sides to other people speaking for us. Those days are gone. We have to able to speak for ourselves. Sure. And hear from, for lack of a better phrase, hear from the horse's mouth. Sure. When I say this bother me, it bother me. When I say this affect me, it affect me. Sure. So if we're not superhuman, if we are not predators, and we deal with all these psychological traumatic behavior, so from a psychological perspective.
Can I go back to something you said just for a moment? I want to make sure we don't miss this. So it is very interesting that whether you are a medical professional, like I have a license to practice psychology in the state of California. So guess what happens if I engage in malpractice or I engage in something that's unethical or illegal? Guess what happens? The board is going to come after me, and they're going to prosecute me. Yeah. They're going to sue me, and I can lose my license, and I'm no longer going to be able to practice. Yeah. So how crazy is it of an idea that a law enforcement officer can have a short period of training, they can be licensed to kill, licensed to carry a firearm, and they can go in and they can do something that's out of policy. And you and I both know that this is what happens a lot. They might even lose their job. And what happens? They just go to another agency.
Yeah. So basically, that's what and you speaking that to, because they get that power from the Supreme Court case, Graham versus Connor, and he's basically talking about the use of force, and that is a loophole that you don't have to use the exact force that used on you. You have to use a force that it's just a subjective way. Sure. If you feel that something is about to get to you, you are allowed to use a force that surpass whatever force that person trying to do. Yeah. But there's so many loopholes in that the studies run amok. It don't even make no sense. Yeah. You could send a cell phone, like you don't know the difference between a cell phone versus a gun. You don't know the difference between a fake gun versus a real gun. You don't know when someone. So that is the problem. It's Graham versus Corner, and he talks about the use of force and the guideline. But basically, what he says is that the use of force have to be proportional. That's basically what he said.
Okay.
If you're using fist to hit me, if I'm a police officer, I could use a baton. Or then somebody was asking me, then what if you can't use a baton? What do you do? Those are the moment tasers are made for. There's a reason why tasers are made. Yeah. Tasers are made to diffuse any force against you that's not deadly force. So you can't tell me if somebody is coming at you with a fist, you can't tase them. If you hold that taser, that's a 5,000 voltage. If you keep pressing it, it keeps releasing. It's not just like you could press it and stop, but if you press it, it keeps releasing. It goes on and on and on. So 5,000 volts, that's a lot. That's like all the equipment in your house, 5,000 voltage. So that's a lot of voltage that comes around. So that brings us to the last point, which from the psychological point of view. So what are the best practices for Black men to cope or deal with this traumatic experience that we're dealing with?
Okay, best practices. Well, I want to first preface my response with there's no one approach that's going to work for everybody, right? So what works for you might be effective for you. What works for me may be effective for me, and what works for someone else might be effective for them. And so I want to preface my response with that. We got to be careful not to give a cookie cutter approach, but I'd say this. Step number one is taking a realistic inventory of how affected that you are, whether it's a George Floyd trial, whether it's your own personal trauma, whether it's vicarious trauma. You have to be honest with yourself about how you've been affected. So if your sleeping patterns are off, insomnia, hypersomnia, if you lost a bunch of weight or gained a bunch of weight, if you are noticing that you are more short fused and angry, any changes in a human being are indicators that something might be going on, right? And so if something's going on and we've identified that something has gone on, now you got to take an inventory of the severity of the whole thing. So if we look at it on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being as extreme as you can imagine and 1 being not so much, someone who experienced effect at a 1 or a 2 or a 3 even, all right, they've been affected, but they can still exist in this world and they can still essentially do what they need to do and function. But someone who's at a 7, a 6, 7, 8, 9, or a 10, arguably that's someone who needs some professional help, right? And certainly 9 or 10, but if someone's at a 6, sometimes it's a matter of interacting with people who they trust, whether that's a pastor or family member or a friend or someone who can kind of listen to their problems and give them a form in which they can cathartic. But sometimes you need professional help. And so it's just kind of
what about physical exercise, like working out and stuff like that?
I mean, working out and kind of doing some of the things that we understand that are helpful for our physical sense, those are helpful. And don't get me wrong, I recommend and I like the concept of diversity when it comes to intervening with yourself. But don't expect exercise to be the solution to it all, right? We got to be very, very careful that we don't say, go work out, go socialize with your friends, and now everything is great. For some people, that might be all that's necessary. For the people who are at a 2 or 3, the people who are at a 4 or 5 and above, they're likely going to require something additional other than just kind of exercise. And so that's part of it. Within the trauma world, there is trauma-specific interventions that go, that best practices that are employed when it comes down to any sort of trauma-like experience. And so you have to make sure that if you are one of those people who requires additional intervention, that you work with someone who is talented and special. They have a specialized approach to dealing with trauma. You can't just go to some regular person who can do everything. You got to work with someone who specializes in trauma.
So tell them how the folks can reach you, man. Dr. Outlaw, how can the folks reach you if they want to retain your service?
Sure. So I have a website. My website is called Journey of Life Psychological. That's the name of my business, I should say. And the website is journeysy.com. Journey, P-S-Y, P as in Paul, sy.com. So if you go to my website, you can see my staff profile as well as the clinicians who work for me, all their profiles. It doesn't have a lot of information outside of kind of if you were looking for services, but even if you can't work with someone like myself or someone in my office, of course, I can refer people elsewhere.
But the goal that there's help is out there, the services out there, we need that to cope with this, because there is a psychological effect of all this killing that's going on for Black men in this country.
Have you talked about the alternative approaches to emergencies, dealing with people with mental or other breakdowns instead of law enforcement to move in that direction?
So we haven't talked about that.
But that's a good point. Jason, I want to thank you, Dr. Outlaw. I want to thank you for breaking all those points down, psychological effect. And now my next guest is here with me, my regular co-host, James Taylor. Dr. Taylor, welcome to the K. Abdul Mahid civil exchange.
Thank you.
How you doing, man?
I'm great.
Yeah, so we got a lot to talk about. But yeah, definitely, we got a lot to talk about.
You remember the last show? It was my suggestion. I said, instead of a political scientist, you need a psychiatrist here, and then a political scientist.
Because that's all being in the same room.
That's why
the synergy really
definitely
works.
Because there's so much what people are dealing with. I think people need the language to try to figure out what they're feeling.
Yeah.
And I think people like you, with your expertise, can help people understand some of the processes or feelings they're going through, or thoughts, or whatever. Even if it's physiological.
Sure.
And I think that's very important because everybody doesn't have the resources and money, but being able to access your knowledge this way is very helpful to people.
For sure.
But I do think it's important to talk about these approaches here in Oakland. Cat Brooks and others have put together the 1999 number that OPD didn't even know about. They set up as a means to alternative first responders. And this is happening in localities all over the place.
Over the country,
And it may come, hopefully there'll be some sort of this goes back to Jimmy Carter, the Democrat, and Ronald Reagan, the Republican. Both in the late 70s, early 80s made this turn towards the kind of, federal support for mental health.
Yeah.
And it was almost not just the money that was deprived, but a general indifference. And that's part of what we're seeing out here in the streets today is some of the long-term effects. And that's both parties. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. That's both parties, I think, are responsible for a lot of this. And the general attitude we've had around people who have, again, I'm trying to be careful because I'm not expert in the language, but who have, different mental concerns and issues. So that's what I want to hear.
Yeah.
About.
So I know to paraphrase what he's saying, that there is this growing trend of trying to replace law enforcement in responding to calls that has mental health capacity attached to that. What's your take on that?
Yeah. I have a couple thoughts, and before I forget, I do want to respond to one thing that you said that kind of triggered my memory here. But definitely, Ronald Reagan in the state of California was one in his policies. Ronald Reagan, and as well when he was the governor of California, released and kind of terminated in a way the inpatient state hospitals, right? So we're going back to the 80s, and I can just remember in some of my early history of systems was a course that we took, which is basically a history of psychology, and it pointed right on back to that decision and the releasing of people from state hospitals. And now guess what you have? You got a bunch of homeless people on the streets, nowhere to go, no treatment, no real resources to really help them one way or another. And I just want to point that out because when you provided some of the history, it just kind of triggered that thought. Now, Abdul, you're talking about.
I was talking about the trend that's happening right in a lot of cities about attaching mental health calls to be dealt with
other first responders.
Let me say this first. I've worked in inpatient facilities. I've worked in outpatient facilities. I've worked in crisis. I've even had a client, not in my outpatient clinic, but I had a client bring a gun to an inpatient facility that I worked at and was threatening to kill us. Right? And we didn't have to, we have de-escalation techniques in which through words and through care and emotion, we can de-escalate people. So let me just say this first. The concept of calling police with guns, who you just described it a moment ago, they want to take it one step up of the threat that they have, right? That's not the solution. And we've seen that over many, many decades, that's not the solution. So I am all for an alternative to that, to addressing certain mental health situations. I mean, we've all seen situations where it's been like a woman with a bat or something, right? And it's 4 police officers and they shoot and kill her. It's like, I could have taken her out myself. Maybe I get hit in the arm with the bat or something, but I don't need to shoot her. I don't need to maim her to address the situation. So to me, it's a fact that we need to do some things other than utilizing police resources and their kind of light switch on, light switch off approach to mental health situations.
Well, yes, in that scenario, when you posted that, if the person is a race other than a black person, they will not use deadly force. Most of the time, we've seen that. How many times we've seen videos of people that are not of blacks that are cussing the police, saying stuff to the police
with guns
sometimes.
Right.
So
having shot cops.
Yeah.
Sure.
So so that's the stuff. So if we're gonna be equal, we have to be equal under the law. We can't just say, cherry pick. So that is a problem. But I want to make sure that we dealt with this from a psychological perspective.
Yeah.
And that's why I brought you on, man. I thank you for coming on and making some point. So now that brings us to us other phase of the show, which is Dr. James Taylor, the phrase that we are that this is all part of Black people on a spiritual journey to be free. And we have to fight at all angles. If we are on a spiritual journey to be free, nothing could stop us. But yesterday, we saw President Biden gave a joint address, shy of his 100th day. Today is actually 100 days in office. And we made an agreement that when after the election, we're going to do 100 days recap to the Biden administration. So Dr. James Taylor, PhD politics. So tell us what's your overview from the take.
This goes back to our last conversation. One of the most important things I think he said yesterday was he fundamentally, and this is forever, this is official for political science, where he renounced Reagan yesterday.
Okay.
He basically said trickle-down economics has failed us for 50 years. That includes what we're talking about in terms of this what's the word I'm looking for? This sort of abdication of government responsibility over mental health areas, where that was a part of Reagan's policies of austerity and downsizing. So the very reality that Joe Biden yesterday basically said, America is now on a new era. If there was a New Deal era, a Great Society era, a Reagan Revolution era, Obama era, which really is, this is an extension of it, Biden is saying we're moving in an anti-Reagan direction. So this should allow us to have a whole new emergent consensus around what is best for now. In other words, everything is broken. So now everything can be refixed, including mental health. Biden is nothing but a Reagan Democrat, an old Dixiecrat from a slave state called Delaware. But he, like LBJ, who was from Texas, right, and a segregationist at one point, is being pushed in the direction he's going in. And I've said from the outset that Biden will have to decide whether he's going to be FDR or Ronald Reagan. Now, his instinct is probably Reagan. Conditions of now are forcing him to move in the FDR direction. And now these $3 or $4 trillion programs he has are fundamentally transformative of so many different areas of life: art, music, theater, education, healthcare, seniors, minimum wage, right? All of those things, everything that Biden is doing in terms of the policy package is pretty good. Now, we have other issues like children at the border and stuff like that we could talk about, but I'm giving Biden very good grades at this point. His tone, his temperament is very needed after Trump. You probably can help us with this because we all got PTSD, post-Trump stress disorder. The whole country is still hoping that this thing doesn't come back out the cave anytime soon. I mean, we're still on the verge. These folk have brushed this evil that we saw on January 6th under the rug because it was white, right? But if it was us, it would never be, January 6th would be the worst day in American history, right? But they tried to brush it on. And so for me, I think at this point, I think, again, we need people who can help us understand what we're going through spiritually and emotionally, mentally right now. I think more than anything, the political Black folk are winning. Black folk are fighting. They are not taking it down, no matter what they're putting, all of the obstacles they put in front of us. Look, you saw this in the movie Selma. The white folk go around getting jelly beans in a jar and then put them in there and ask the Black folk to count them. And Black folk are smarter than them, so all they did was went to the same single hardware store in town, got the same jar, put the same jelly beans in, counted them, left them back at home. Oprah goes to the registrar and says, "There's 922 jelly beans in the bag." That's who we are. We always, and if you notice, all of these efforts at voter suppression, they've lost in 08, they lost in 12, they lost in 2000, they really lost in 04, but 08, 12, 16, Trump lost the popular vote, 18, the midterms, 20. My point to you is this, especially between 08 and 12, when people came out in a record number for the re-election of Obama, that was a surprise because they thought people had gotten over the novelty of it, and the support would go down. But it went up. And I was telling people all over media at that time, this has to do with Black people saying to those who engage in voter suppression efforts, our mothers and fathers couldn't vote in this lifetime. Sure. And before they leave this earth, you're going to try to take the vote from them again? Sure. And so they can't vote for this Black man? So I think Black people actually thrive more when they see these voter suppression efforts. Look at Houston. These white folk did everything they could, reduce the whole county of millions to one box. What did Black people do? They sat there for 9-10 hours. They don't understand who they're dealing with. This is what I'm trying to tell you. Black people are determined to be free in America on their terms. And the idea that we're going to continue to allow this foolishness in terms of the games that people are playing, these racial games, I think we have to understand that at this point, you have real efforts across the country to bring about change. Young people are on the front lines. And it's not just Black folk, it's all kinds of people. And so I think part of the panic of January 6th was that they saw the diversity of June and May in the George Floyd protests.
The summer.
They couldn't take that because that was the most distinguishing thing for all of us. We were like, whoa, look at this diversity. This is amazing. And I think they saw it too and realized it just signaled to them that much more that their time is over, or that the time of that mentality of being white over everybody else is on the decline. And that's what they have to, I think they have to grow up off of.
And so wouldn't that also justify, at least in their mind, we got to do something now. Right. We got to do something outrageous. Right. We aren't going to take this. Right. This is our country, right? All that mentality, I think, culminated with the January 6th event. So it makes all the sense in the world. But there's one other thing that I wanted to mention, just in terms of hearing you, us talking about like the mental health sort of response to this. I just want to let everyone know that for us to experience a lot of worry that Trump is going to all of a sudden figure out a way to come back, or they're going to figure out a way to, reduce the vote. Like, that worry is not only rational because of our history, but it also, as a human being, we experience emotion to protect ourselves from this kind of outrageous sort of treatment that we've experienced. And so I guess I just want everybody to realize, like, when you experience depressive symptoms or anxiety, or just this kind of need of like, I need to cope somehow, that's your human element coming out to attempt to manage this crazy world that we live in. And I think a lot of people kind of forget that, and they just want to just exist in normality with no symptoms at all. Like, we experience fear and anxiety and love and jealousy and all those things for a reason. If we didn't have those emotions, we wouldn't have survived as a species. And so sometimes people think like, I want to get rid of this negative emotion, but I want people to realize like that's there for a reason. Now, when it gets significant, you got to do something about it, but
never let your emotions
you're almost abnormal if you don't experience some of that, right?
Viktor is one of my favorite thinkers from his book, Man's Search for Meaning. And as a psychiatrist, he said abnormal responses to abnormal circumstances is normal. Correct. Something like that. Like, in other words, if the situation is crazy, then you should respond that the situation is crazy. You can't be normal in crazy times.
Crazy times, definitely.
And we can argue that we've been in many a decades of crazy time. Unfortunately, we've had to figure out a way to assimilate, and there's certain things that we've done that arguably are progress, if you will, from previous times. But we are fighting right now as Black folks for our place, and for our equal place as well.
And see, one of my favorite thinkers is Harold Cruz, who wrote The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. And he wrote in a different piece in Black World in 73, an article where he's talking about this theory of Black cities. And he's basically trying to explain how Black people have moved throughout America. And he says that what we have is our spiritual culture. He wasn't religious, neither was Du Bois. But Du Bois, who was atheist or agnostic, understood the power of our culture. And that's why when he writes The Souls of Black Folk, he's just, that's Du Bois. To me, Du Bois's book in 1903 captures Black history forever. Like it's like a miracle book that people who were alive understood its import because of him, but also its vision and all of its ingredients.
Sure.
But I think it's also important to understand that, as Black people are sort of trying to, survive in America, right? They've had to be inventive. And what Du Bois outlines for us very early is in the chapter of the faith of our fathers, right? He talks about Black spiritual culture, right? I think Black power was nothing but the final stage, if you bear with me, of the secularization of the Black struggle to be free. And you said, all of our Black religiosity, Moses, Exodus, Harriet Tubman, Garvey as Moses, King as Moses, right? Exodusing to Oklahoma. There's always been this religious dimension to Black American culture. And I'm saying our spiritual culture, not religious culture per se, but it also includes our religious culture. It includes church going, but it's not just that. It's blues, it's jazz, it's ragtime, right? It's hip hop, it's now trap, right? And what people don't know is the last 3 generations of Black Americans are moving back south. The Xers, Boomers, and Millennials. Nobody's leading them, and that's how Georgia turned blue. You end up with 200,000 more people in Georgia, and nobody understands that since 1970, everywhere Black people had left to go up north, they stopped everywhere. And since 1970, Black people have been going back home for 50 years, and nobody seems to know this, that Black people, Boomers, X's, Millennials, have moved back home. And this is going to be the future of Black America. The future of Black America is Southern, South. Atlanta is like Harlem was in the 20s. Sure. Black folk are going there, converging, young people with music. Everybody's moving there. Atlanta was Atlanta in its own right, even when Harlem was Harlem. Sure. Don't get me wrong. But Atlanta in the last 10, 15 minutes, probably a little bit longer, but it's increasingly become this important Renaissance place for Black folk.
Okay, so JT, well, let me ask you, you mentioned the South, but so let's elaborate that. You have the South, you have the Deep South, you have the Bible Belt. So how long will it take for Black folks to start having some political traction in those places?
That's why Georgia just turned blue. That's why you got a senator. Okay. Don't underestimate the importance of a U.S. senator from the pulpit of Martin Luther King. Please understand when I'm talking about spiritual culture. So, that's spiritual culture right there. If you can't see that Warnock is in Martin Luther King's pulpit and Black folk in the spirit of King John Lewis and C.T. Vivian mobilized in their honor and put these 2 men, a Jewish man and a Black man, in power in Georgia.
Okay, well, let me pose the
North Carolina is next.
No, the North Carolina.
South Carolina after that. Mississippi after that. It's over.
So you have Tim Scott. Okay, so JT, you have Tim Scott.
It's over. That's why they do all this. That's why they do all this.
Just gave the statement last night.
That's why they're doing all this voter suppression, because it's over.
He just gave the rebuttal to the joint statement.
I didn't watch it.
Yeah. So what he was basically was saying,
I can't look at the brother.
Yeah. He's basically saying that
I can't stand nobody who always shows their gums.
Yeah.
Stop showing your gums, brother. Come up your gums.
So what do you say to that? Because that's the opposite side of what's happening in Atlanta. So that was my point. How long will it take for we to have progression taking like South Carolina and North Carolina?
It's complicated because just because it's going to be Black doesn't mean it's like, for the people. We have Black elites who don't relate to the people. True. We have got to figure out a way to get representative leaders like Cori Bush.
Okay,
she's for real. Ayanna Presley from Chicago, from New York, from Massachusetts is for real. AOC obviously is for real, right? Ilhan Omar and
Minnesota
and the other sister, Rashida Tlaib, right? Yeah. They're honest. We got more and more progressive people coming in, but you also got sharp people like Barbara Lee, Hakeem Jeffries,
the flag bearer. Barbara Lee always been the flag bearer.
And Black people are always conditioned to put down their own. We put down our preachers. Yeah. We put down anybody who stands up for us. It's our habit, right?
You mean they put down or they make fun of? I mean, because
our comedians make fun of them.
Okay.
But I think it's important to understand that when people stand up, to try to represent us, they're doing the best they can under the conditions to try to speak to the issues. But critics are quick to find shortcomings in anything that we strive to do.
And you are, and the only thing that could assess to that is ignorance, because there's a saying that opposite: when you know better, you do better. Right. So if folks don't know what you're trying to do, then they're like, "Oh man, why are you doing like this?" So, and that is the whole idea of having a podcast like this, civic engagement, telling you exactly the stuff that you need to know, and talk to you about brothers that are fighting in institutions all across this country that are actually doing the job. It's easy to just talk the talk, but when you're actually doing it, it's a whole ball game. But we want to make sure we bring it to the people.
I've said this before in a recent interview, and that is that at some point you have to ask yourself, how is it that we're surviving? Mm-hmm. Right? You look at the indigenous people here, right? They had thrived for 3,000 years, the Ohlone people, before they were affected here by the Spanish, right? Black people and they had their own deep cultures. The indigenous people had deep culture. Right? African American culture is adaptive. We are like, you give us the pig guts, we're gonna make chitlins. Give us the oxtail, we're gonna make oxtail. Give us the hog maw, we're gonna make hog maw. It might be bad for us, but we're gonna eat, and we're gonna eventually be strong. And now Black folk eat healthier than they used to, right? Hopefully we're doing better than those days. But my point to you is, they did that with chitlins. They did that with Jesus. They gave us a white Jesus who was their religion, who represented them. What did we do? We took it, cleaned it off, like we cleaned the chitlins off, and we reproduced Jesus in our own image and our own likeness out of the experience of Black struggle. So when you read Du Bois in his books, he got, Jesus as a metaphor. The Black man is like a crucified Christ figure in Du Bois's work, where he's talking about the coming of John, or when he's talking about Jesus Christ in Texas, or Jesus Christ in Alabama, where Jesus gets lynched like a Black man. Du Bois does this. Du Bois understands with the souls of Black folk that's what this whole thing about being Black in America is about. The souls of Black folk. All the religion, from Father Divine to the Nation of Islam to the Rastafarians, you looking at the outer veneer. So Father Divine is 4'11", call himself God. You tripping on his religion. Meanwhile, he's feeding hundreds of thousands of Black people around the country during the Great Depression, sitting on $30 million that the government can't touch because he says he's God under the First Amendment. Meanwhile, he's actually carrying out Black power. You can't get that Malcolm X without realizing that Malcolm X belonged to a Black cult. We want to act like the Nation of Islam somehow doesn't come out of the same tradition as the Moorish Science Temple, as the Rastafari movement that started in Harlem. I keep trying to tell people, Rasta did not start in Jamaica. Rasta started in Harlem in the 1920s when their Jamaican leader Garvey was here, and a man named Leonard P. Howell, Howell, who was the original Gong from Damien Jr. Gong Mali. Gong is Howell. He was in Harlem when Haile Selassie was elevated. He went to Jamaica, connected with some Rasta in Jamaica. They united. But people don't understand. Reggae was born in Jamaica. Rasta was born in Harlem. So I'm telling you, I'm just trying to tell you something.
No, yeah, definitely.
Our culture, right? So Father Divine is playing on it, right? Daddy Grace, Reverend Knight comes along later. We're laughing at them, but meanwhile, they're actually carrying out Black power in the name of religion. Bear with me for a second. Martin Luther King, Father Divine, Elijah Muhammad, and let's say a Pentecostal Black preacher to a white religion are all the same. There's a book by a scholar named Joseph Washington called Sex and Cults, SECTS. He explains that what Black religion has always really been about is a Black struggle secularly to get free. In other words, he says all of our symbolism, Exodus, Moses, go down Moses, way down in Canaan's land, all of those metaphors that we adopt, we did not adopt for 300 years here. We adopt from about the 1820s on up to the 1960s, this new orientation. So it's really between Harriet and Martin King. You got 100 years of this idea of Black people, because the white man in the South is a Protestant, Scotch-Irish white man. He's not Catholic. So Martin King and the Black Southerners are learning the language of the white Protestants to talk to them. So when King gives I Have a Dream, he's talking to the white man in his own language. But Father Divine and Daddy Grace and all these urban cults that emerged are proof that black folk was still not fully embracing the religion. Bear with me. Now, Father Divine, the Nation of Islam, I'm saying to you that Malcolm X is the source of black power in the cult movement of the Nation of Islam. When Malcolm X, and when black power is uttered, the Panthers right here in Oakland have rejected the religion of the Muslims, but they've kept Malcolm X. I say this in my book on black nationalism. They wanted Malcolm without his religion. You can't have Malcolm without his religion. Huey didn't want it. Eldridge did, right? My point is, when you start talking about black power, I'm saying to you in 1966 is the final clarity of what I'm talking about. If what I say right now doesn't make sense on the continuum of a trajectory on the longitude, if you can't stay with me with the Father Divine cultural thing, you have to get the point. You have to know, just like we took jazz and blues to the cities from the South, we recreated our religious life in the South. We couldn't afford big cathedrals, so we bought storefront churches where the Holy Ghost was rampant.
So basically, we stand on the back of our ancestors.
But I'm trying to make the point that black power is the moment when it gets secularized for good. The religious dimension of it becomes less pronounced. Malcolm is gone. King is still on the scene, but everybody says black power was a push away from King, you see. So the more you see black power, what I'm trying to get you to see is that much of our struggle was a sacred struggle. Black power is a clarification that it was as much secular as it was spiritual. And what I'm trying to get to is this. The indigenous people have been genocided out. Black Americans have survived. White people are dying in America in 33 out of 50 states faster than they're being born. Black people our population is exploding to 75 million in 35 years. I'm saying to you that Black American culture is as powerful as white supremacy. I'm saying to you, not as a high culture, like European culture, like Mozart and the art of, I don't know who, Beethoven, all of that. I'm talking about a dry, long soul, proletarian, everyday people culture that helps you survive the onslaught of pressure from the society you live in. And I think that's something that people should understand is the Black culture to this day is informing the world. All over the world, when people rise up, they still sing, "We shall overcome." Some of us have gotten tired of hearing that song.
Yeah.
But it is power all over the world. We are an inspiration as a people all over the world. And I think we need to appreciate how we have had a positive impact on democracy in America for history's sake.
Yeah. Like you said, we are Black people are the democracy in this country. So, and that is a good point. But I want to segue back to you, Dr. Outlaw. So, in order for us to be politically astute, spiritually astute, we have to have a sound psychological mind. So, if our mind is not right, we can't be able to do all the stuff that we're talking about. Can we?
Yeah, well,
go ahead.
It'll be very difficult. And one thing, as
Taylor.
As Dr. Taylor was saying, that kind of struck me a moment ago is I think we have to be honest about the effect that the Eurocentric worldview has had on us. And so even when you guys were talking a moment ago about how sometimes there's some obstacles to us supporting each other, we got to realize that Europeans did a really good job at making us think that everything that is white is the best.
Right.
Whether it comes, from the art, whether it comes to how you look, the darker skin complexion is the worst thing that could be. And we all bought into it. Even to this day, we got the light skin, dark skin thing going on. And now we've gained some consciousness around it, but nonetheless, it's been a huge impact. And here's one thing that I think is very important to understand. Part of what has been done by Europeans over the centuries is a result of their inferiority complex, right? So when you look at the fact that white folks these days are going to tanning salons and are getting lip injections and are getting butt injections and everything that represents us that's a clear indication
Yes, sir.
that they really want to be us or
Yep.
be like us in
Yep.
some ways, yet they're not that.
Yep.
Therefore, let me make you guys feel bad about what's natural for you, but I'm gonna reap the benefits on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I just wanted to just point that out. Yeah. We're continuing to figure out ways to get to the other side of the damage that's been done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's many books that's been written about just the effects of slavery and effects of kind of everything that took place during that period of time, all the way up until modern day. And if you don't understand and recognize that people who are our age, younger, and so forth, still to this day will look at, you can take the dog study, right? They'll look at a white dog and a black dog and ask which dog is better. And to this day, more times than not, black children and white children are going to choose the white dog. And that's just based on all the imagery and all the stuff that's been put in our heads, and we got to continue to fight against that.
So it is very important that we continue to educate our folks, especially our young folks, about the stuff that we need to do in our history. And that's the whole idea of bringing us together and to talk about this thing, because all over the diaspora, we have been doing the work and we have been fighting the fight, but we have to get sure our spiritual mind right. And because, you know, if you lose your mind, your spiritual consciousness is probably gone.
Yeah, and I have a colleague.
But let's hear your take.
I have a colleague at the University of San Francisco Law School, Rhonda McGee. And she's written a book about mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness. And she's a respected law professor, but she really thinks that we as people, especially Black folk, because her book is about healing through police and racial justice. She asks us constantly, like she would stop this proceeding right now and just force us to like meditate and breathe. Like it's weird. It's weird. Yeah. It's weird when she does it, because I'm always like, really? I ain't got time for this woman. Hurry up. But she'll stop the room and make everybody start pausing to breathe, be present, make sure you clear, you're not distracted with your bills or your problems. You're here, you're acknowledging fully the people in front of you, so you can be here and be, full, both present and for others. And I think, again, what I'm suggesting, I'm not trying to make an idol out of Black culture. I'm just saying, as I look at how we have moved all over the country, we've never, please be clear, Black people have never stopped moving. We've been moving since 1770. From 1770, with Pap Singleton, when they moved to Oklahoma, how did they get to Tulsa to be genocided in 1921? They went there in 1877, right, with Pap Singleton, right? That was the first migration. Then we had the major one that went to Harlem up north. That's the second one. Then there was a third one out here to the west, right? Don't forget the original one was from Africa across the sea, right, in the transatlantic slave trade. Then we was up in Virginia, and then they took us down later to the deep south. Black people have never been still. We've always been mainly a southern people, but about 40% of us have always gone out to explore this land. But we always keep a foot in the south. And at some point, we're going to have to decide as a people, because I think part of this racist policing we're seeing is an effect of our out migrations back. What I mean is, if we've been moving back since the 70s, we're moving not just to places we're familiar with, we're moving to places like Kenosha.
We go to new territories.
Aurora. Yeah. Where was that? Queens something, North Carolina. Yeah. I ain't never heard of that town last night where they killed
Elizabeth.
Queens. I never heard. My mother from South Carolina. I ain't never heard of that place. You see, my point is, some of these young brothers and sisters are being victimized in new areas that we're migrating to, where these white cops aren't as familiar with Black people. They see us, they don't know what to do. So what really needs to happen here is Biden needs to go after a rural program and really train rural and urban, suburban policing, as well as the major police departments. True. Because you are more in danger. I'm more afraid for you driving through Wisconsin because you got a client there that you have to go see, and you're at your hotel just driving to IHOP to get some breakfast, and on the way they don't know who you are. Next thing you dead.
Or 20 miles outside of Atlanta, right?
Yeah. Come on, brother.
But that's the whole idea of the broadband technology. So that the job, so there's a lot of program that this administration is doing. The American Jobs Act plan, extending broadband to the inner city. So there's some good things that are on the way. We just got to stay the course and bring the knowledge to the people. Yeah. So that's why we have roundtable discussion like this. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to make sure you stay tuned. We're going to have more of this. I just want to wrap it up. And so before we wrap it up, I want to say, Dr. give the people some last minute parting words.
Yeah, I just would echo what you mentioned a moment ago, and Dr. Taylor as well. We got to figure out ways in which we can center and ground ourselves. We have been taught and assimilated to basically figure out how we can be a part of this Eurocentric society, and we go. We got to go to work. We got to do this. Got to do that, and we find ourselves getting further and further away from our own personal practices and our own practices of our people. And so whether it's mindfulness, whether it's meditation, whether it's guided imagery, whether it's whatever it is that you do that's going to help you center and ground yourself, we got to get back to that. We got to come up with our own stuff as opposed to borrowing from other people.
Find a
So
way to get
I'm just encouraging everyone who's
Yeah.
watching to figure that out for yourself. And I know I'm making it simple. I'm making it.
But that's how it is. It
Yeah,
should
but
be
that's
simple.
practical. That's
Find a way to
practical.
get, and then we not think we have a common ground. We found a way to get center. We at the golf course all the
This is
time.
true.
So that's
Exactly,
great.
exactly.
So Dr.
And
Taylor,
I would add, like,
your parting
I
words.
would, Brother Outlaw, is Juneteenth. Juneteenth is coming up. This is what I mean by spiritual culture.
Yeah.
What is Juneteenth in San Francisco? A homecoming. Everybody from all over go back home, right? In Texas, people go back home. It used to be a homecoming for Black folk, right? To go back home and visit your folk, because slavery, a great aspect of it was, the family breaking, but people still, they said the main thing, characteristics of Black people when they got free was, first it was sort of like, well, what do we do now? The first thing they did was went and tried to find their families, to recover their families, And I think that's, something we have to recognize, is that we come from an ancient people, a beautiful people.
Yeah.
We come from some beautiful ancestry. I'm not trying to say it was better than anybody
That's
else.
it. That's
I'm
why
not trying to
this
say-
is a reflection
I'm
of this
not trying to
connection
say
right here.
I'm not trying to say Africa. I don't believe the idea that Africans were kings and queens in the sense that all of us would be kings and queens. I believe there was African kings and queens and empires. That don't mean I was an African king. I was probably born from a servant. I'm more proud to be from the proletariat in the Egyptian kingdom. I don't want to be Pharaoh.
Sure.
I want to be with the people.
With the people, you know.
So that's, but I think what's important for us to recognize is our culture. Again, I'm not trying to idolize it, but I'm trying to help us understand there's a reason why we're still standing, y'all. Why you think you still standing? Why are you still standing? They're not, they just showed you they have nothing left but racist culture.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, see what white people have in common is only one thing. Most white people have nothing in common except racism, not even race. Because if you talk about race, there ain't no two white people, the Irish, the Jew, the Italian, the Pole, the Welsh, the Scots. My God, don't even try it, right? But if you think about how to interact with African American people, how it deals with us, our culture has helped us survive. Our spiritual culture, our music, the blues,
Music, yeah.
the jazz. You got the blues right now. He knows the professional language. Howlin' Wolf says if you got the blues, all you got to do is listen to the blues. Because if he got the blues and he's singing his blues, ain't gonna make me feel better about my blues than hearing you sing about your blues. And if your blues make me laugh because your baby done left you and your mom, your woman done left you, that's what people don't understand. But check this out. The blues also, now this might be going back a little bit, I don't want to, but the blues is also atheistic.
Yeah.
The blues ain't asking for God. The blues is talking about my baby done left me, my woman done left me. Ain't no, it's Billie Holiday saying, if I go to church on Sunday and cabaret all day Monday, ain't nobody's business if I do. There's some rebelliousness in this. My point to you is Black people with ragtime in the 19-teens. We created jazz and blues in the cities, the cults that I mentioned. We have been an inventive people. Trap music, whether you like it or not, the Southern dirty South culture is where we are. And I think we have to recognize that our culture keeps allowing us to survive. It's why we're still standing. It's why white people are dying. And listen to this, white people are dying compared to other white people in the world, in America. They have and about 7 years ago, the life expectancy rate between Black America and white America almost disappeared. And it wasn't because we're doing better, it's because they are doing worse. And this is before the opioid crisis was killing 130 of them a day. And 75,000 people. So opioid is proof. Trump is proof. January 6th is proof. They have lost something. But we still stand deep in our culture. So I'm saying when Juneteenth happens this year, like it did last year, Everybody in Black America should celebrate Juneteenth and
So-
celebrate it like you ain't never celebrated it before. Exaggerate your support for it because that's where we are. We have got to be involved in a cultural revolution. We don't got the guns. We don't got the money. We don't got the TV. What we have is our culture. That's our nuclear weapon. Our culture is our nuclear weapon to fight back on against this evil that we're facing. And we all need to tap into it as often as we possibly can.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that's where we are. So we are on a spiritual journey. So we're gonna come back with you all on Juneteenth, and we're gonna bring that together, the spiritual journey. So this is your boy K. Abdul Mahid, Dr. Outlaw, and James Taylor, and this is the Civic Exchange. So catch us on the next episode, ladies and gentlemen. Good night, gentlemen. Thank you all.
Thank you, brother.
Sir.
Thank you. That was fun.
Dr. Taylor, I finally get a chance to meet
Good to
you,
meet
sir.
you, brother. Good to meet you, man. Yes.
I love
Yeah,
you.
when you sent the picture, I was a little confused because, you know,